So during our last session, we started talking about containers, right? So as I said, that is the most important thing that first we need to learn as part of Spring. Okay, so like a Tomcat, WebLogic, JBoss, how that servers work for servlets and EJBs, right? Similar way for your Spring MVC application, right? Whenever you implement a where-based application, right? Web archive. Where means web archive. So when your application is having where file, that where will run only in Tomcat or any server which is having servlet container. All these servers are having servlet container. That servlet container will do what? It will unzip this where file and it will extract all your JSPs and servlets, and for them they will create objects. Okay, and if they have EJB container, similar way EJB objects also they will create. EJBs we will create it as a EAR file, enterprise archive file. That enterprise archive file data also this application servers can extract and they can create objects because they will have EJB container. Tomcat will have servlet container. Okay, now coming to Spring application, when you design your Spring application using Spring modules, right, to run your Spring classes, whatever classes you have implemented throughout your project, okay, if you have 1000 classes or 10,000 classes, whatever number is, all your objects, right, from for class 1 to class 1000 or 10,000, whatever number of classes you have implemented, all your classes objects will be created by your Spring container. Okay, Spring container will create all the objects. We call it as IOC container. We call it as IOC container. How this container will create objects? Just you need to mention all your classes in Spring XML file. This is old approach actually. In new approach, in new Spring Boot approaches, there will be no XML file also. There will be no XML file. Not only in Spring Boot, even in Spring Framework also, they avoided all these configurations. Manually, you need not to go to XML and configure them. Okay, so this configuration also will be automated, which means you just need to focus on your classes implementation. You just need to focus on your business, which means let's say you have a registration page, you need to focus how to read that data, how to send it, and how to do database operations here. The remaining object creation, dependency injection, everything will be taken care by your IOC container. Which classes objects it can able to create? If your classes are belongs to Spring framework, then it can able to create objects. If your classes are not belongs to Spring framework, okay, some other classes you have implemented without following any Spring rules, then that object will not able to create here. Okay, getting? So whatever classes you have implemented here, that classes either you need to configure in Spring XML file or you need to follow Spring concepts. Then it will recognize that class as a Spring class and it will create object who IOC container. Okay, so when you implement application using Spring, all your you can use any Spring module. Okay, end of the day that Spring class will be launched on IOC only. Okay, all your objects will be created on IOC only. So let us extend more about these containers, right? There are two flavors of containers here. How they will work we will see. Okay, now before going to container also, let's talk about initialization. Okay, so you might heard about lazy initialization and early or eager initialization. Okay, or lazy object creation and eager or early objects creation, eager object creation or early object creation. So there are two ways that object will be initialized in containers, especially this is in containers. While following new keyword approach or class dot for name approach, if you put your statements right inside main method, automatically object will be created eagerly whenever you start your application. Okay, in general object initialization is will happen whenever new keyword statement line executes, right, then object creation will be started. But this lazy initialization and early initialization topics belongs to containers. Okay, so whenever you deploy your application, right, let's say if you deploy your servlet application, servlet.var file, sms.var, if your application is having 10 servlet classes within it with eager initialization, we put load on startup, right? So if you configure them with load on startup or without load on startup also, they will initialize, right? Am I correct? Anybody aware of servlets? Do you know when servlet object will be created? Just a minute. Okay, it is taking too much time. Okay. Just a moment, guys. Yeah. So when you configure load on startup to your servlets, right? Load on startup. So that will do eager initialization when you configure your servlets with load on startup. Okay. Load on startup when you configure, right? Which means when you start your server, they will be loading. Load on startup. When you start your Tomcat container, all your 10 servlets objects will be created whenever you start your Tomcat server. So that means eager initialization. Servlet with load on startup, load on startup, right? If you configure load on startup, objects will be created. Object will be created during server start. During server start only objects will be created. Without load on startup, if you configure servlets, without load on startup, if you configure them lazy initialization, okay, I wanted to make sure that will work here. Okay, so without load on startup, without load on startup, if you put object will be created during not server starting time, during user request. During which user request? First user request. During first user request, the object will be created. Okay. If you don't configure any load on startup and if you mention lazy initialization, right, servlet object will be created at first time user request. Whereas if you configure load on startup, objects will be created during server startup time only. Which means, in a simple word, right, if you try to book a food, if you try to book a food, okay, consider this is your something Swiggy or Zomato application, okay, Swiggy or Zomato application. Whenever you try to order food, okay, so I'm very hungry here, so I want to order breakfast. I want to order breakfast here from Swiggy or Zomato. I want to place a order. So I'll be checking menu here. I'll be checking menu veg or non-veg menu. I'll be checking here. I'll be checking menu from each hotel. Okay, I'll be having multiple hotel uh, uh, available here. Hotel 1, hotel 2, and each hotel will have multiple food items here. Item 1, item 2, another hotel will be having item 3, item 4, like this. So all the hotels and the available food items list, it will show us here, right? Now, if I pick one item here from one hotel, if I pick one item from here, and if I send this request, if I send this request to order service, if I send this request to order service is available in your code. So whenever you pick this item in your cart and when you call this order service will place the order and you will receive the food. But before going to you order, whenever Swiggy application deployed, right? Let's say during maintenance some changes they did and they redeployed it. They redeployed it last night only. Okay, around 12 p.m. they deployed it. 12 a.m. they deployed it. Consider at midnight they deployed this application and they tested it. Now everything is working fine. Nobody ordered it. I wake up early in the morning and I started requesting for the food. So they deployed their application, Swiggy application in server. They deployed it already. They deployed the server. They deployed the Swiggy application into the server already, right? And I ordered for the food. I ordered for the food. So by the time I order for the food, will this order service class object will be available or not? In general, is it a good practice to make it available or not? Order service object should be available for you, right? Or it should not. Whenever you request, then only it should create that service object.
Yes, it is. Yes,
This order service object should
yes, it
be
is.
available.
Yeah,
Otherwise, what will happen? Let's say this order service is having lot of initialization code. Initialization means during object creation, if it is creating, data source objects, transaction objects, and if it is checking other server dependencies, everything. When I try to book for food, right, first time, if I am a first user, very first user, if I am the first user, very first user who is requesting for the food, if I am a very first user who is ordering for the food, okay, so when I try to request, if this order service class to initialize, right, let's say if it is taking 10 minutes of time, some classes may take time because they might have lot of dependencies, okay. So if this order service to make it up, okay, all the classes objects creation, let's say if it is taking 10 minutes of time, for the very first user he need to, after selecting items, when he try to place the order, right, it will rotate for 10 minutes. Will he stay? No, he will close this application and he will walk away, right? He will not wait for the 10 minutes to place his order. Whenever I place order, instantly it should accept it and the delivery should be delivered within the 10 minutes or less than 10 minutes. That's how he will expect, right? So for the very first users, if it is taking much time, they will not even touch that application again. They will frustrate with this time how much it is taking. So generally, and not only waiting time here, right, there are lot other problems also we will discuss later, okay. But for this very first user, if this object is already initialized and available, this 10 minutes of time we can avoid here, right, so that instantly he can place his order. Even he is a first user also, it will consider him like a normal user, and this initialization is already happened during deployment time only, so the order service object will be available for him, so immediately it will place the request and he will receive the food. So always it's good to have all the objects initialization happened before actual users hits your server, correct. If you have a hotel, will you prepare food before customers come to your hotel, or you will start cooking food? Let's say if I come to your hotel and if I order for the biryani, Will you wait me there for next 1 hour to prepare the food? Or for every user, will you start creating or start preparing biryani again and again? No. Maybe at the time of like before 12 o'clock itself, you will prepare everything and you will wait for the customers. And that too, you will prepare the same food for maybe 100 customers or 200 customers based on the value, right? So your objects or your food or whatever it is, you are making it as a available to the users, right? You need to initialize them first, or you need to prepare them first before they come to you, right? Similar way, your classes or your objects need to be initialized very beginning during deployment time only, not at the time of first user request. So that is what here, right? Lazy initialization means during user request, during first user request, it will create objects. What about the second user? From second user onwards, the same object will be available, because most of your server objects are singleton objects. Whatever code you will write and you will deploy, right, it will maintain only one single object for that classes. Mostly your objects are singleton classes. Okay, singleton means only one object. Either that object will create during deployment time. First thing, during deployment time it may create that object, while you, right, while the Swiggy developers during deployment time, when this developer deploy this application, right, during that deployment time, objects will be created. Okay, if that is happening during deployment time, we call it as eager or early initialization. Early object creation should happen during deployment time only. When it will not happen, if they configure this order service as a lazy object, then during deployment time it will not create. Okay, early object creation will happen during deployment time, and lazy object creation will happen during first user request. You may ask question here, what about second user? If I am a second user, you ordered food already, for you it taken 10 minutes, and what if I order as a second user? Then when you order as a second user, for you it will not take time, because already object creation is done. Most of your objects are singleton objects, means one time object will be created and that object will be there for lifetime until you shut down your server. So which practice is good, lazy or eager? You all following?
Elri is the best one rather
Yeah,
than lazy.
early object creation is the best one, because objects will be available readily in your server to receive the user's request. End of the day, applications will be deployed in the server for whom? For end users only, right? If it is a banking application, as a customer you will log in and you will check your balance and you will do fund transfers. During fund transfer, if it take 10 minutes time, hackers can easily come into your application and they can hack everything. The request, if it is open for 10 minutes, which means all your objects need to be there readily available. Whenever you try to do fund transfer, within seconds that transfer should happen. All your bank objects need to be prepared very well before. Though if it is a, you know, any application, and not even one, any application, a banking or this, what we call this food applications, any application, even your OTT applications, whenever you deploy your OTT code, all your movies related objects need to be prepared very ahead, and that movie should be available. So I can click and I can watch it directly. Instead, whenever I click again, if it is trying to create that movie object and if it start streaming, then it will take a lot of time. Which means, in a simple example, whenever I go to hotel, order should be available. They should not start preparing it. If it is a quick, uh, you know, uh, things like chapati, they might prepare it instantly. But if you order for biryani or if you order for something else, which will take a lot of time, right? It's better to create that very early before. so that easily they can serve and we can eat. Similar way, the servers also should create your objects during deployment time only. That's we call early object creation. So if server creates objects when first user requests, then we call it as lazy object creation. Okay, lazy object creation. And most of the servers, right, they will create only one object. Objects will be singleton. Whenever you deploy, right, servlet object singleton. Only for first user it will create object. From next user same object will be used. Only for first user it will create object. What about next user? It will use the same object. From next user onwards it will use the same object. Only for first user it will create object either in lazy initialization or eager initialization. Even in early initialization also, only during deployment time, during server start, only during server start it will create object. From next user request onwards it will give the same object from next user request onwards, or for every user request we can say for every user request same object will be used. The only difference is here this object will be created for first user, here this object will be created during deployment time. During deployment time, I always recommend to use early object creation rather than the lazy object creation. The reason is all objects will be readily available for you, and if any user starts requesting your application, immediately it will give that object to the user. And not only that, okay, if there is any fault in your object creation, if there is any fault or if there is any exception or if there are any errors, it will be populating while deploying itself. It will show all that errors, so that at least as a developer, right, we are all the developer, we are all developers here. So as a developer during deployment time, if some errors, it will populate during deployment time. We will get errors, right, during deployment time also. It will say this is not well configured well, and this is not auto void, there is a null pointer exception, something it will show. If there is an issue, connection issues or database issues during deployment time, at least if it show errors, we can able to go and fix them, right? At least during deployment time, if it start creating all the objects, if there are any faults, that I can fix. But if I deploy application confidently by thinking everything is working perfect, when first user request comes and if it is throwing exceptions to him, maybe waiting 10 minutes I may consider, but seeing errors, he may not consider. He will think that okay, this is a fault application, I should not use it. This user never visit this application again. So then which is best practice? During deployment time creating all the objects and making sure that everything working fine, or during first user request, you as a developer, you should confidently say my application is working. How you will say? If it is early object creation, then only you can say confidently, correct? What do you guys say?
Yes, sir. Every object creation is the best practice.
Correct. Not only from the user perspective, to make sure that your code also working perfect, it's good idea to do early object creation only. Correct. If I visit a showroom for a car for test drive, if you say, sir, wait, I will fix the tires, steering, everything for you. You need to wait for next 2 hours. He will fix and give it to us. If you forget to fix brakes, that's a fault object. If we have already, prepared the car very well before, and if we do test drive, and if we make sure that car is working perfect, and if we make it available for us, we can go and easily test drive it, or we can buy it. If you say wait, I'll fix everything for you and I will not even do test drive, you need to drive means we don't know. If you don't fix brakes, accidents might happen. Correct? Similar way, your code also need to be deployed and tested very ahead. All the objects need to be integrated together and everything should work properly before actual users hit your application. So I always recommend you to do early object creation. Okay, I always recommend you to use this second approach, early object creation. And here servlet objects, right? How many objects it is creating? Only one object. So when only one object is created, for many users we will call that object as singleton object. Singleton object. Singleton. Here and here only singleton objects only created. Singleton means only one time the object will be created. From next user request onwards, the same object will be served. The same object will be served your purpose. Similar way, in Spring, right? If you write 10 classes for your application, 10 classes for your application, right? How many objects it will create? Only 10 objects will be created by your IOC. Only 10 objects will be created by your IOC. Why? If I have lot of users request on daily basis, let's say by month I am getting 1 lakh users request, is it good idea to create 1 lakh objects, or is it good idea to have only 10 objects to maintain RAM free? Which is good idea? Having 10 objects or having 1 lakh objects?
10 object is better.
Better, right? It will make free lot of your RAM memory. Some applications which you are using in your mobile may hang every time because they may not maintain memory properly. It may occupy lot of memory and your applications may go hang. Similar thing might happen to your application also. If this Swiggy application is having, like, let's say 32 GB RAM in their server, and if this object's creating continuously, and from here early morning if 1 lakh users start ordering food, or if they start ordering groceries or milk, if you try to create 1 lakh objects here on 32 GB RAM, right, it will crash. It may not hold. In other words, we can say this memory may not sufficient for them. But instead of that, let's say Swiggy application is having only 100 classes. Okay, if 100 classes are taking 1 GB of memory, hardly it will not take even 1 MB. Consider 1 GB of memory. The remaining 31 GB is free. So that 31 GB will be utilized to process your request. So in a quicker way, it will serve user purpose. Otherwise, if it is doing object creation for every user request, for 1 lakh users, if it start creating, for 1 lakh users, 100 objects, again if it start creating, 1 lakh GB might required here. 1 lakh GB. I don't know in TBs or in petabytes we need to call. Okay, so instead of having this much GB memory, having this much is sufficient, right? Instead of consuming this much memory, even they can't have, or they can't even maintain this much memory in their servers. It is impossible. So if you go with singleton objects, this much memory will be sufficient for you. If you go with prototype objects, this much memory is required for you. And we don't know, this is not fixed. It depends on the user size. If 10 lakh users request, then 10 lakh GB memory you might require. So it is impossible. You can't able to provide that much server memory. So always prefer singleton. So it will not consume lot of memory. It will consume only whatever it required for that object, and it will maintain it for lifetime. So if I go with the singleton objects with early initialization, I will be having lot of benefits. My application will be readily available, like ready made. It will be readily available for the users, and it can accept any number of users requests because all my objects are singleton objects. If there is any case that you need to make it prototype, you can do it for one or two classes, but most of classes singleton is sufficient. I have never used any prototype object till this time. I haven't used. Maybe in multi-thread applications, or maybe if it is a standalone application, you may create prototypes. But generally, in general web applications, you never see any prototype object. You never see any prototype objects. Most of objects are singletons, singleton objects only. One object will be created, that too during deployment time. So as a user, you can do request for your whatever service, so that is readily available and it will execute your request in a quicker time and it will give you response. Okay, so now coming to Spring, what kind of initialization it is doing? As we were talking about Spring containers, right? Spring is having two containers, core container and J2EE container. It is having two containers, core and J2EE container. Core container is doing lazy initialization. Core container is doing lazy initialization, whereas J2EE container will do early initialization. It will create objects immediately, whereas your core container will create objects only at the time of user's request. Similar way, like servlets only, you can compare your IOC objects. Here if you see this code, right, until here server startup code, okay, until line number 16 server starting code, okay, you guys able to see, right? Eclipse code, this line we are reading XML, are you guys able to see?
Yes, sir.
And in this line number 16 it is loading your file here. So here basically the server is starting, your IOC server is starting here. Let's see, let me put it in debug mode, okay. I'll put debug point here and here. I am creating one test class object, right? See, either the test class object creating at a server starting line or this is user request line. Okay, here actually user requesting. If it is a web application, you will see this flow from maybe some HTML page, as is it is simple main application, right? Consider this is your request. Get bean is doing by user, okay. So as a user I am trying to requesting for test object here to call hello method. Okay, now see at the line number 16 what will happen and at the line number 20 what will happen. Okay, try to run it in debug mode so that you can clearly observe what is happening. Switch. Okay, now I am at line number 16. My debug execution stopped here. Okay, this line is not executed yet. If I execute this line means server will start. Okay, let me go to next step. Okay, step over. Let me click here. In console also I don't have any output. Okay, just click on next step. This line is now executing, which means server will start. Okay, now server started. August 14th, loading XML bean definitions from class path. So who is doing it? Your IOC container. Core container is doing it. Just it is giving log. This is not our log, your container log. It is showing some XML is loaded. Fine. Now here we are at line number 20. Okay, at line number 20, as a user, let's say Naveen is requesting for test bean object. Okay, line number 20, I am requesting it. If you see here, clearly observe there is no object. Server is already started. There is no object. Okay, so we can say early object creation is not happened here. Early object creation not happened here. This part is not happened here. This part is happening here. Lazy object creation is happening here, because already server started but no object. Now here user requesting in line number 20. See, when user requested, When user requested using getBean, it is created object. Test object is created. You saw this, right? Test object created after this line number 20 execution. After this line number 20 execution only this object is created. Server is started but object is not created. Server is started by the line number 16 only, but your object is not created. Object created when user requested. When first user requested, your test class object creation created. Okay, now complete this process. So I am calling hello method, hello output I received. Now let's do this. Naveen as a first user requesting. Naveen as a first user requesting. Now let me do this for you also. Okay, let me do it for Ashiki also requesting, but she is second user requesting. Okay, object 1, let me rename this objects. Okay, now this is first user and this is second user. Two users are executing it. Okay, two users are requesting for the same object getBean of t, getBean of t. For the same object we are trying to requesting it. Now let's execute it. Okay, I'll put debug point here as well for the second user. Debug. Okay, so here your container is starting in line number 16. Let us start container. Go to next line. Your server is started. Your server is started. Now first user requesting for the object Naveen. Okay, there is no object yet. Now I am requesting here, right? Let's execute this line. Okay, test object is created for me. Okay, fine. So hello method also executed for me. Okay, so object is created and good morning message also I can see here. Good. Now Ashiki also doing one more request for the same object. Okay, now if I execute this line, will it create object or not? If it is a singleton object, it should not create for the next user. Already one object is created. Let's see. If this line passes, right, line number 25, it need to show us one more output, test object output. I don't see any test object now. One more object is not created. This line is executed but not created. Why? One more object also given to us. For her, hello method is executed. Good morning. Again, good morning message I got. Received. But object not created. So then this good morning message coming from which object? This is also from first object only. So here increase this count. One more user also can request, but it will not create object for him. Whatever object is already available, right, that object only will be given to him. That object only given to him. So now Srinivas is requesting one more object, third user. As a third user, he is requesting same object t2.hello. Let me start this again in debug mode. So now let's skip this step. Server, let's start server. Server started. Server started. Okay. Now Naveen is requesting for it. Let's execute Naveen's type. Object created for him and good morning message got. And let's execute for Ashiki user request. So for her this code is executed but no object created. It is giving hello method execution but with no object, means the first object only utilized here. Now executing it for Srinivas. For him also I am getting good morning message, but object is not created. Same object is used. How can I make sure that all objects are same? T object, T1 object, T2 object. You can compare them. Okay, you can compare them. You can see system dot out dot println. I can check, is T is equal to T1 and is T is equal to T2, or all these objects are equal? Yes or no, you can see here now. If it is yes, it will give true. Let me execute it. So here only one object is created and good morning message getting for 3 times for 3 users, and it is saying 3 objects are true. True means they are equal. T1 is equal to T, T2 also is equal to T only, which means all 3 objects are same objects. Consider if it is like your food ordering application. Okay, during first user, for me it will take a lot of time to create biryani object. From your request onwards, it will serve you directly, because for me it is taken time, but for not you. For other users it will not take time. Only for first user request it will take time. Still, why the first user need to wait so long? Need not, right? So what you can do here in XML file, right? This is the XML file where I configured my class. Here you have lazy initialization, lazy init. You have one property, lazy initialization. You have option here false. By default it is true for your core application, okay, core container. I am saying it false. Lazy initialization, do you want to do lazy initialization? No, false. Now see the difference. Let me try to run it in debug mode. Let's execute this. Server is starting now. By default lazy init is true. No, even now also it is creating. At first user request only. What difference it will give if I make it lazy init? No. Let's run it in debug mode. Let's start container first. Server is started but no object created, which means by default it is lazy. It is not even responding it. Your core container is lazy container, even it is not considering whether you mentioned it lazy or not. Okay, this properties you can use. Then you may ask question, why this property came here? This is came because we are using this DTD. This is common for this XML tags are common for core container and advanced J2EE container also. That's why we are not seeing difference here. Okay, it's okay. So always this core container is doing lazy initialization only. Until first user request it is not creating object. So very bad container. Object is creating at first user request. Okay, the same XML file, the same code, I will load it into different container. See, same code. Let's create one more class. Let's create one more class, J2EE container. Main method. So the J2EE container server class name is not bean factory, it is application context. Application context is not available because that jar file we didn't add it here. Let's add that jar file, build path configure build path. We added only beans jar file, core jar file. We need to add in this core jar file only your core server you have, bean factory. So I need application context. It is available in context. There is a context jar file that I need to add. Spring context. There it is. Spring core, spring context. Here, okay. Add this context and context support. Maybe context is sufficient. Let me add two jar files. Okay, so instead of bean factory, now I am going to use here application context. Application context AP is equal to new class path XML application context. Load your resource here. You can put your resource object here. If it accepts, no, not accepting. If not, then put directly your XML file reference here. It will accept. Okay, directly load your XML into J2EE container. Okay, I am loading it into J2EE container. Earlier factory used to create objects at first time request. When Naveen request only, it used to create this object. Now it is J2EE container. Let's put debug point here, here, here and here. Right click, run as Java application, debug as Java application. Now we came here to J2EE container. Execute it. See what will happen here. Class visitor ASM library. Okay. Still one more ASM library we need to add. Along with the context jar file ASM. Fine. Debug as Java application. So execute this line number 20. Resume, which means it will go to the next step. No, loading XML bean definitions, fine. Still is it loading? Property accessor. Expression. So expression library also it is expecting. See, J2EE container is having lot of dependencies. ASM it was asked and it is asking for core context aspects AOP support expression here, because it is having lot of features, expression supports everything it is having. So that's why this is the actual container, right, with a lot of features. Execute. Yes, now you can see server started at line number 20. First user Naveen request not yet executed. but still you can see test object is created. Along with this log object also created. Your object is prepared by server during startup time only. Now as a Naveen, if I request here, if I execute my statement, it will just say good morning for me. Okay, fine. It is not creating object, directly it is executing my method. And for second user also it is doing the same, and for third user also doing the same. And finally end of the day, if I check all these objects are same, yes, same object, not a different object, same object whichever is created during loading time, the same object is given to me. So from this context, what we can understand, advanced container, which is J2EE container, creating object at the time of loading your XML only. Here only object is created. Though you have one class, 10 classes or 100 classes, all your objects will be created here only. And whenever first user request, for him it will give the same object, whatever is created during server startup. The server started, right? During server startup, whatever object created, that same object will be given to first user, second user, third user, till 100th user, 1000 user, 1 lakh users or millions of users. Same object will be given to everyone. So this is how Spring Container will create objects eagerly during deployment time only. We deploy this logic in our Linux machines or wherever, right? In your cloud machines, wherever you deploy your application. Once you deploy your application, this code will be executed. This line number 20 will be executed generally in your Spring applications. So then what immediately it will do, it will read your XML file and it will extract all your classes, whatever number of classes you have here, right? It will read all that classes and it will create objects for them. Okay. So finally the conclusion is Spring is having containers, so that are two. One is core container, namely it is Bean Factory, and other one is application context. Core container is the lazy one, application context is the eager one. Core container will create object during first user request, whereas early container will create objects during loading time only. So in next session we will see what is singleton, what is prototype. Okay, we will discuss more about singleton and prototypes in real time, how singleton and prototypes will work, right, with similar example, whereas it is taking small amount of memory if it is a singleton, why it should take lot of memory by putting prototype. Okay, we will do that discussion and we will go to the next topic. Okay, we will start discussing dependency injection, which is very important concept. Okay, so yeah, let's focus on these two topics.